everybody, I am Jared Ross, a GeneaVlogger, and welcome to a new genealogy tutorial. On today's tutorial, we will be discussing the features on geni.com which allow users to put multiple name variations for one person. When it comes to names, there can be all sorts of problems when it comes to the different variations, and especially trying to enter those into different family software. Most family software don't give you that many naming fields, and you're often limited to putting in multiple names into one field so that you can give a better representation of that person and their name throughout their life. When it comes to naming convention issues, there are two main problems for most genealogists. The first big problem is when you have somebody immigrating to somewhere new, especially if they have a name that's in a different language. So if they're immigrating from Russia to America, you're often going to find that they're going to have a Russian name, they're going to have an English name, and they may end up having a shortened English name after living in America for a while. You may also find other variations to the name. You might find a transliterated version of the Russian name. There are all sorts of different problems that can pop up from having somebody immigrating from one place to another. The other main naming issue that most people will find when it comes to genealogy is the variation depending on the record takers, as each record taker would write the name in the way that they thought it was spelled, especially if the person they were getting the information from was illiterate. So a lot of people will find family names, even when they're living in the same place, in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it might just be that someone is in a culture that is within a greater culture, and the naming conventions within the subculture are just slightly different than that of the overall culture. A great example of this are the Sephardic Jews living in Amsterdam. They had a way of spelling their names within their community, but when you find the Dutch civil records on them, you'll often find that their names are spelled in a Dutch way, which is different than most of the documentation that you're going to find within their own community.
So starting out, we're going to talk about the naming standardization on Geni. So geni.com, for those who don't know, is what's called the World Family Tree. They're a family tree software similar to what you'll find on Ancestry or MyHeritage, but the difference to those is that with the World Family Tree, you're going to be merging your family tree with somebody else's family tree when the connection is found. So if you have a second great grandparent and somebody else shares that second great grandparent and you both put your trees onto Geni, the system will notify you both that there is this possible connection. And once you see that and you can go over that, you can then merge it, and then you have one big tree. And after lots and lots of merges, it has created what's known as the world tree. But with the world tree, there does come problems with how different researchers put in different names. So Geni has created a standardization. So this is the page for the Coalition for the Standardization of Geni Naming Conventions. This is actually a project on Geni, and these aren't necessarily hard, fast rules. These are guidelines to help you in terms of putting in names to optimize the system. So starting out, there's just the basic rules, the general rules, which we have listed here. The first is just use ordinary case. A common thing when it comes to genealogy is people like to use all caps when it comes to surnames, but on Geni, just use ordinary cases. Use a capital letter for the first letter, and then all of the other letters should be undercase letters. Now, beyond the basic rules, you can get into your more area-specific rules. When it comes to naming conventions, there's definitely no one-size-fits-all. So there are a lot of different pages and projects dedicated to naming conventions, naming standardizations based on specific areas. So just scrolling through, you can see these different areas. As well as specific areas, there's also naming conventions for specific time periods. So if we're looking at names in ancient Rome, or if we're looking at medieval Europe, or anything like the biblical tree, then you're going to be looking at specific naming conventions that are going to be different than other areas of the entire world tree. Go into these links and learn the proper naming standardizations that have been applied to the areas of the family tree that you are working on, whether it's a family that you descend from or a family that you're interested in researching. If you're doing a lot of work on Geni, make sure that the naming standardizations that you use are proper. Now that we've looked at the standardization of naming conventions on Geni, we're going to go over the actual page where we're going to enter in these names. So here we have the create a new branch page. To get to this, all you do is you go to the research drop-down menu and you go down to create a branch, and that'll bring you to this page. And here we have the naming field, this big blue box. And in it, we have 6 different fields that we can enter in. First, we have title. And with title, you want to focus on things like doctor or rabbi, things like that. You'll see here that when you go over the question mark, it talks about this as well. You don't want to put things that are, courtesy titles such as Mr. or Mrs. Then for the name, we have first name. So obviously that's going to be a first name. And then with the middle name, that's your middle name field. And then here we have our last name field. And then we have the suffix. So if they're a junior, a senior, a third, a fourth, anything like that, if they have a PhD or anything where it's going to be suffix afterwards, maybe DDS. Then we also have the birth surname. So as we were talking about before, when you have someone where they have a birth surname and then they have a name that they've changed to later in their life, you're going to put the surname from their birth in this field, and then you're going to put their last name in this field, the last name that they took, or at least the one that they died with is the one that I prefer to use. Sometimes you might have someone with multiple names, especially if it's a woman where she married a couple of times and so she took a couple of different surnames. To enter those in, we have to enter those into the also known as field. And I'm going to show you how to get to that in just a little bit. Now we've talked about these fields, there's one of the main features with this that puts it above all of the other family tree softwares, and that's this add language button right here. By clicking this, you can see that there are a ton of different languages that you can add for different name variations. So maybe even if someone was born in Japan and then they moved to Korea, and then from Korea they moved to America, well, they are going to have a Japanese name, they'll probably have a Korean name, and then they're going to have an American name. So you can enter in all of those. A very common one with my research is that I will have someone where they have a English name, they'll have a Ukrainian name or a Russian name, and then they'll also have a Hebrew name, and sometimes they'll even have a Yiddish name. And all of these names are going to just be slightly different. You might even have someone who has a Spanish name and a Portuguese name where there are variations that really don't make that big of a difference, but they can make a huge difference when it comes to searching for these people. One thing I should note with the naming variations by language is that English is always going to be set as the default. So you're always going to be putting the default name under English, even if it's from a different language. Now, if it's a different spelling of language, so let's say it's Hebrew, it's usually best to put the Hebrew letters, the Hebrew characters, under the Hebrew heading. So going in here, clicking Hebrew, then you'd put the Hebrew name in with the Hebrew letters, and you'd put the transliteration, the English variation of that name in here. Now, one thing that the program doesn't account for is different variations on naming conventions from different languages. So a great example is patronymics. For a lot of different languages, they didn't have surnames. They had patronymics, which are often used as surnames when they enter a culture that uses surnames. So, for example, in the Hebrew culture, you're often named your name and then your father's name. And your father's name is what would be known as the patronymic. Now, it's not really a surname, but when it comes to Genie and pretty much every other software program for family trees, those patronymics are not going to have a patronymics field. You're going to have to put them in the last name or the surname. A lot of people will often put them in the middle name, especially if they are in a generation where they still had patronymics and a surname. A lot of different cultures that used patronymics ended up using surnames as well, especially any places that were conquered by Napoleon in the 19th century. So the naming conventions can vary from languages, but they're not going to always be accounted for. Once you've created a profile for somebody, that's when you can enter in the also known as field. So looking at Abraham Lincoln and clicking the edit button, we're able to pull this up, and you can see also known as down here. Above that as well, you can see the display name. Now, all of these are grayed out because Abraham Lincoln's profile is a curated profile and it is currently locked. So to be able to edit it, you have to be a curator. Now, with the also known as tab, you can separate different names with commas. So here we see president, comma, 16th president. Then they have semicolon, honest Abe, comma, Abe. So this is giving you multiple names. So if someone just searches Honest Abe, they can find the president. So if you have a family member who has a nickname, or such as my case, my second great grandfather, Abraham Nunez Vaz, had a stage name of William H. McNay. Well, that was a name that I put under also known as. So if I luck out and someone who's researching old vaudeville in 19th century London finds a program with William H. McNay, they can find my grandfather. But if I didn't have an also known as tab, I might not be able to include that. Aside from having your basic naming fields and having your different language naming field, Genie also has an extra feature which allows you to add other fields. I mentioned before that it doesn't really account for other naming styles, but you can always create a special field if there's some sort of special name that doesn't really fit with the others. So here we have the family tree for my Nunez Vaz family. And going into Abraham Nunez Vaz, you'll notice in the display name that I have a 1. The reason for this is he is the first in the Nunez Vaz family numbering system. And before they had a way to add extra fields, I only was able to put it in the display name. I still keep it there to help avoid people merging him with other Abraham Nunez Vazes, because that used to be a common problem and one of the reasons why I started doing the numbering system. But if you have something similar to a numbering system, or maybe you're researching a family that comes from a special royal house, well, you can scroll down here and you'll notice I've created Nunez Vaz family number system and I put 1 because he's the first in the number system. But we can also add more information. So we just click that and then we can put our label. So let's say maybe that they come from the royal house of Plantagenet. Well, you can put that in here. You can put in the royal house and then put in that information. This allows you to add more information without putting it into fields that doesn't really apply to, and gives more control in terms of being able to organize all of the information. So if you have any sort of extra naming field that you think might be necessary, or maybe some sort of information on people, you can include that. Now, as I mentioned, it's often best to use the proper characters from that language in which you're putting the name. So here we have Hebrew, so we're going to want to use Hebrew letters for the name. And for Hebrew, you might not have a keyboard that works with Hebrew, and you might not even be that great with it. You might be actually reading a document that's in your hands and you can't really just copy and paste. Well, if that's the case, a really good helpful tool is the Lexilogos website. They have what's known as the keyboard feature, and this is completely free to use. All you have to do is go to www.lexilogos.com/keyboard. It's going to take you to this page, and it gives you a ton of languages to use. I use it all the time for Russian, for Ukrainian. I use it for Spanish and Portuguese for the special letters. I also use it a lot for Hebrew. And even better, is that it gives you historical letters. So let's say we're going to look at German. Well, here we have German, we have all of these different letters, and it gives us the special characters, what to do to type them in, so you can just type it as you go. And then if we go back and we take a quick look, here we go, Russian. So we get a huge list, the entire alphabet, and we have capital letters, we have lowercase letters, and we also have the old Russian characters. So if you're doing records from the 19th century in the old Russian Federation, they have a lot of letters like Yav, which are not used anymore, and you're not going to be able to find them on a modern Russian keyboard. There are a couple ways to enter names on Lexilogos. You can just click in the box and just type. So for example, Itzko, I'm going to do Itsko. And there you go, you have Itzko. It's not always as straightforward, and sometimes if you type something and you're expecting one letter, so a common one, S's are always different. So let's say we want to do S as the name. Well, we don't really want S, we want sh, the SH. So what we do is we type SH, and there you go. You get the SH character. But you might not always know how to get to that character, so you can always just go down here and just click on whichever character that you need to get. Now, for anyone who's stuck around and really is not sure why you would want to put in all of these different naming variations into Geni or adhere to the standards that they're trying to set within the different naming conventions, and the reason for it is mostly to optimize the world family tree. By getting the names all in a same standard, it makes it so it's easier for someone to go into the world family tree, to look at their own family or look at other families, and it's easier to streamline, whereas it's going to be very hard if you have one person putting in names in one way and another person putting in names in a completely different way. Another big thing for Geni is that search function. By having all of the different variations of names, it allows anybody using the search function to more easily find those profiles that they want to find. It's going to be a lot easier for someone who is from Russia to find somebody with a Cyrillic spelled name. That is most likely the type of characters that they're using for their search. It's the same thing when you're having something translated into English. If you don't speak Korean or Japanese or Hebrew or Russian or anything like that, you're not going to understand what those letters mean. You're not going to really be able to pronounce it. So you want to have an English transliteration. And if you can search for that English transliteration, you might be able to find the people that you're looking for. So it's the same thing with adding all the different variations of naming styles, languages, and just any sort of variation that might set somebody apart, even if they have an alias. And another big part is just having a cleaner looking tree. One of the things that I've personally always hated with a lot of family trees on Ancestry or just any website really is when a person has like 20 names as their entire name because someone put, 3 variations of their first name and then 3 variations of their middle name. And then they put like multiple patronymics and they'll put multiple surnames. And you just get this big, clunky, long name where it's really hard to decipher what are the names that really do matter. Sometimes you can, but for the majority of people, especially those who don't do genealogy, so by having all of these naming standardizations, by having all of the different fields to enter in each name into, it's going to make it much more streamlined all around. They're not going to really understand that as well, and it can lead to a lot of confusion.
Thank you so much for checking out my video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. And be sure to click that bell so you get all the notifications. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger, or become a patron on Patreon. I'm the GeneaVlogger. I'll see you in my next video.